Now we're on Daf Ayin Tes Amud Beis, and we're listing the unique halachas that apply to get and exclusively to get, and we're up to the third halacha. Hadi Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, and the Rabbanon made an iser that you cannot be motzi on Shabbos a chayfetz from one person's house to another person's house unless they do an erev chatzeros between them. And therefore, you're not allowed to take something on Shabbos and be motzi it from the gag of someone to the gag of someone else without an erev chatzeros. And therefore, lo yamod adam begag zev yiklot megisham megad shel chavero. A person can't stand on his gag above his apartment and bend himself into the gag of his neighbor and then be kolet megishamim. And even though it's enom regilum lishtame shimushe dira begagos, even though you might say that gagos are not usually used for normal tashmishim, nevertheless, they're considered two gagos and two reshuyos, even if they're contiguous. And the reason for that is kshem shediyurim chalukim lamata kach diyurim chalukim lamal. Just like down in the bayis, below the gag, each one of the two gagos. Each one has his own shimush li'atzmo, and therefore they're considered the two batim as reshuyos nefrados requiring an erev chatzeros. So too in the gagos we say that the gagos are more or less extensions of the two batim, the two reshuyos nefrados, and we need an erev chatzeros v'hani. That only applies, says Shmuel, in Shabbos. Aval get. If the Baal was mashil a gag to his wife in order that she should receive her get, and the get fell on a different gag that was contiguous, but it was the gag of the Baal, nevertheless we assume that minastam he was mashil her even a makom even in the second gag. So therefore, if he's mashil her a chot, so we're not going to say that minastam he was mashal the bias, but we would say that he's mashal one gag and the other gag. Mishum kpedahu the kulealo kapti inshi. The only reason why, if he was mashal a chotzer, he didn't intend to be mashal the bias. That's because of kpeda. You know, there's the bias, the chotzer. We don't want you to use my bias. But as far as gagos is concerned, we don't have that chashash. In general, we don't even use tashmishim of gag, and therefore a person is not makvid to say, well, I only was mashal you this gag, but not the contiguous gag. Amar Abaye shtei chatzeros zu lifnim mizu. So you have one chatzer pnimis inside another chatzer chitzonis hapnimis shelo ve. She owns the inner chutzah. He owns the outer chutzah. Umechitzos hachitzonos odfos al hapnimios, and the walls and fences that surround the outer chutzah, which means the Baal's chutzah, are taller than the mechitzos of her inner chutzah pnimis. Vizar kola, and the Baal was in his chotzer, and he threw the get into her chotzer. Kevan sheigia liavir is, we're going to see migureshes. Once it reaches the airspace of her inner chotzer, she's migureshes, even though it didn't come inside the mechitzos of hachatzer, and it's not. 1 second. So again, the get is now in the avir of the chotza chitzona, And now it reaches the avir, if you go straight up from her chotza pnimis. But as we said before, the mechitzos of the chotza hachitzona are much taller than that of the pnimis. So it might be in the airspace above her chotzer, the chotza pnimis, but it's not within the mechitzos of the avir of the pnimis. It's within the mechitzos of the avir chitzona, and therefore it's eno nishma min ruach. So what's protecting it from the ruach, that the ruach might just simply blow it away? It's the mechitzos hachitzonos, because again, it's below the avir of the mechitzos hachitzonos, above the avir of the mechitzah pnimis, but it's still considered minta, and therefore her avir in her chotza pnimis will be kona the get, even though it's not within the mechitzos hapnimios. My time of pnimis gufa mechitzonos chitzonos komitra. The chotza pnimis is protected by the mechitzos of the chotza chitzona. And this reminds me of the sugya, famous sugya in Bava Kama of midas stone of zenenev zelo chaser, meaning that even though he owns the outer chotzer and it's the shmira for the inner chotzer that's owned by her is supplied by the mechitzos of the avir chitzona, nevertheless she can consider her avir as if it were protected by the chitzona, by the mechitzah chitzonos. Now we're talking about kalim. We're not talking about a chotzer, but rather a kli. Shtei kupos zu b'toch zu. Pnimis shalo, chitzona shalo. Uzrakola, the Baal throws the get into her kupa, and it reaches the airspace of the kli, the inner kli that's her kli. Afilu igili aver pnimis ena megureshes. My time is olo nach. The get did not reach the bottom of the kli, and a kli is not used for its avir. A kli is used for its what word can I use? It's karka. We'll use the word karka. The karka, the kli, I mean. So therefore, there's no such halach as avir kli kone. Only the kli itself means when there's anacha of the chayfetz in the karka is of the kli, then it's kone. So with regard to a chotzer, we say the shimush in the avir of the chotzer. But in contrast, in kli, there's no shimush in the avir of the kli, there's only shimush in the tachtis hakli, the karkis hakli. Frek the Gemara v'chinoch, and it's very simple to you that she could be kona the get when it lands on the karka of her kupa. Now keep in mind that her kupa is inside his kupa. Then it's kelev shalokeach, havi kelev shalokeach, b'shus mocher. Her kelim to be kona the get through the kli apnimi is inside the rishus of the Baal. And we have a machlokas amoraim in Bava Basra Pehayim and Beis of kelev shalokeach b'shus mocher, whether he's kona or he's not kona. And for the Gemara, hachamayaskina bekupa she'en la shulai. The outer kupa has no bottom to it. It's just surrounded. So lo under kupasa al kupaso el ala karka. Her kupa is not situated on the karka of his kli because he doesn't have the bottom to the kli, and therefore her kupa is only on the karka itself. And that karka is not the rishus of the mocher. And this leads us to the famous Mishnah of Get Yosha. If a man was misyachet with his wife after the ksiva saget, before the nesina saget, Beit Shammai holds fine. The get is kosher; he's allowed to give that get. Beis Hillel omrim no. We're not going to allow a man to be megarish his wife with the get yoshan when there was yichud. The eze get yoshkos nisyachta nisyached ima me'achar sheksavala. After the ksiva, he was misyached with her before he delivered the get. Gemara says, what are they arguing? What's the svara of the machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai? And the whole question is about a chashash with regard to the vlad. We don't know how long the Baal is going to delay delivery of the get. And during that period of time, it could be that she became pregnant. Why? Because he was misyachid with her. Then she gives birth, and everyone thinks that the birth was a result of conception that took place after the get was delivered. They don't realize that the get had not been delivered. So they say that this vlad is pagu. Beit Shammai savri lo amrin gzeira shemur geita kodim livna, uBeis Hillel savri amrin gzeira shema yomru gita kodim livna. Let's start with Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel holds that the spectator might think that this babe who was born today was conceived after the get was delivered. He had a relationship with his wife, who's now his ex-wife. And therefore the child is what's called a pagu. And they're going to be motzi laz on this child that he was born out of wedlock. Beis Hillel's not worried about that. There is no such gzeira. Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Shmuel, im niseis lo teitze. Even according to Beis Hillel, who says you're not allowed to use the get, if he went ahead and he divorced his wife with that get, and then she got married, then we're not going to bust up the marriage. But the Eved, we're going to assume the get is kosher, but nevertheless, chatchila, she shouldn't get married until she gets a second get. Ikar di Amri, Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Shmuel, in this garsha, tinase lechatchila. Even according to the opinion of Beis Hillel, if he took the get yoshan and he delivered the get, she's allowed to get married. Even lechatchila. Beis Hillel only prohibited using the get to be megarish bo lechatchila. And this leads us to the Mishnah of Shina beget mitakonis chacham. One of the basic takonis chachamim of a get is that the zman be written in the get, which means that the sofer has to be makted to write the malchus, how many years into the malchus of this particular malchus, where the get is being written. Because of it, instead, the Mishnah records, instead of recording the date of this malchus, Lishum Malchus Sheino Genes. He wrote the date in the shtar based on the Malchus of Rome. Rome is called Eino Genes, or Lishum Malchus Madai. That's also Eino Genes, or Lishum Malchus Yavan. And you could go a step further. Let's say he didn't write any Malchus in the get. He just wrote the date. And let's say he wrote the date, Leminyan Shemonim Mizman Beis Hamikdash. Oh, alternatively, he wrote the minyan Lich Churban Habayis. How many years it's since the Churban Habayis? In all these cases, the get is possible. It was not written according in compliance with the requirements of the Takonis Chachamim, which is minyan Shnos HaMalchus, this Malchus. So if you're in Bavel, it's the Malchus of Bavel. The Mishnah now brings another scenario in which the get was not written properly according to the Takonis Chachamim, because the Chacham were mesaken that the sofer should mention in the get the makom shebo kosev haget, makom ksiva, and haya b'mizrach v'kasa b'maro v'kasa b'mizrach. The get is possible in all these cases. Why? The sofer was in the eastern part of that Medina. The get was actually written in the western part of that Medina. I'm sorry. Start again. The get was written in the eastern side of the Medina, but the Sofer mistakenly wrote the Makom as the western side of the Medina. Or the reverse. B'marov, the get was written in the west, v'kasav b'mizrach. And in the get, the Sofer wrote that it was given, that this get was written in the Mizrach HaMedina. The get is possible. And now, with regard to a get possible, either because there was no Malchus, or he wrote the wrong Malchus, or he wrote the wrong location of the Ksivas HaGet, in all those cases, if he went ahead and he took the get and he was Megarisha, then we hit her with the kitchen sink. If she went ahead and got married based on this get, she'll have to be divorced from her second husband. She also has to be divorced again from her first husband. And tzricha get mizeh u'mizeh. V'ein lo ksuba v'lo peros v'lo mezonos v'lo blos lo al zeh v'lo al zeh v'im nitola zeh mizeh tachzeh. All her rights to ksuba forfeited when she got married based on this get that was possible. She loses her rights to, what does it mean, Peros? Peros here means Pidia, because Pidia is Tachas Peroseh. And neither the first or the second husband is chayiv to be Poda. Mizono, she cannot claim support from neither the first husband or the second. And lo blos, if she brought in begodim, old shmatis, she brought it into the marriage, and she said, I'm giving this as a dowry, as a contribution to the marriage, which means they become nichsei tzon barzel, and the Baal is not chayav, he doesn't have to return those begodim. And that's true both from the first husband, the second husband, and if illegally she grabbed on and took these begodim, then we take it back. Havlad, if she had a child from the second husband, mamzer. But the Mishnah says, mizeh u'mizeh, that even a vlad from the Baal HaRishon is a mamzer. And the vlad min HaRishon, says Rashi, is of mamzer midrabanan. Midrabanan, the first get that was delivered by the Rishon is pasul, and therefore midrabanan she's considered like an Eishes Ish. Tosfos and other Rishonim hold that the get of the Rishon is kosher midaraisa. It's only pasul midrabanan. The Vlad min HaRishon is a mamzer doraisa, because the get of the Rishon is kosher midaraisa. Therefore, the chalos of the Kiddush to the Sheni is chal. Below zev is zev if the first husband that gave her this get puzzle is a Kohen, or the second husband that she married based on this get is a Kohen, then neither of them will be metameo when she dies. Below zev is zev sakoin lo mitziasa. And now on the flip side, if we're busting up the ksuba and invalidating it, then the Baal cannot be zocha in what he normally would be zocha through the ksuba, and therefore if she finds a mitzia, it doesn't revert to the Baal, or maisiyadeh, she doesn't have to fork over her wages to the Baal. Below bafaris nidorea, neither of these two bailim can be mefer on nidorim. I will try to explain why. And hoisa bas Yisrael nifseles min hakahun. So let's start with Maise Yodeha. The Rabbana made a takana that any wages that she receives should accrue to the Baal, and that's quid per quo because he's supporting her. But this woman is not getting any support, and therefore she can keep the Maise Yodeha for herself. Then we go on to Hafaras Nidorim. Neither of these two quote-unquote husbands can be made for an Nidorim. The reason why the Torah said that a Baal normally could be made for Nidarim is Kadesh Lo Tiskan al Baila. We don't want to bust up that relationship, and we're very sensitive to that love relationship between a husband and a wife. However, in this case, where it's Teitzi Mizeh Mizeh, there's no impetus to want to save the marriage and to apply the principle of Shema Tizgan al Baila, and therefore the Hafaras Nidarim is out of the picture. The Rashba has a slightly different approach, based on the Gemara and Yevamis of Kol Noderes al Das Baila Hi Noderes. And once she's Yotzeis Mimena, Ein B'daita Lindar al Daita. So al Das Baila doesn't apply in the case where there is a requirement of the divorce and the marriage has to be busted up. And as far as Nifselis Mina Kohuna is concerned, which means she can no longer marry a Kohen, and all the Achronim ask, why does Rashi say she can't marry a Kohen? Because she's a Zona, and a Zona is Asur Lakuna. Why didn't just Rashi say she's a Grusha? And the answer is because Rashi Lishitaso in the Mishnah, that the get that he delivered to her is Pasal Midoraisa. And therefore she's not a Grusha, because the get is Pasal Midoraisa. So Rashi is forced to introduce the Psul of Zona. And we'll finish up here on the top of Daf Pei. Bas Levi min Maser. If she's a Bas Levi, the Rabbanan instituted a Knas, and she cannot eat Maser. And if she's a Bas Kohen, she can no longer eat Truma. She has the status of an Eshesisha Zinsa because she got married based on this get Posel, whether it's Posel Doraisa, Posel Rabbanan. And the Rabbanan made a Knas that she doesn't collect Suba. And they also instituted that Knas with regard to her children. Ein Yorshin Shel Zeh, Yorshin Shel Zeh. The Yorshin of the Baal, and that's the first Baal. And the Yorshin of the second Baal did not inherit Haksuba. The Imesu, and if the Baal of Rishon of the Baal Sheni die without any children and she falls for Yibum, Achiv Shel Zeh, V'Achiv Shel Zeh, Choltzim V'lo Misyat. She requires Chalitza from both the brother of the first husband and the brother of the second husband before we could allow her to get married. Okay, then this is where we'll stop for today. Tomorrow at 7:30, as usual. Thank you so much.